Good morning, everyone. I thought we were going to get away from Iran, but that is not going to happen. We've got lots to talk about. But first, yesterday, Donald Trump signed phase one of the China trade deal, and he tweeted this morning at 8:41, quote, "One of the greatest trade deals ever made. Also good for China and our long-term relationship. $250 billion will be coming back to our country, and we are now in a great position for a phase two start. There has never been anything like this in U.S. history. USMCA next." So, I don't know anything about Meng Wanzhou or if there's been movement on that, but hopefully you'd think maybe there would be, because, Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Trump are so close, and Mr. Trudeau asked him really nicely, could you maybe take care of that for me? And because of their because of their relationship, I'm sure there's been no movement on Meng Wanzhou. So, but USMCA next, which means Trump's looking at trade. Trump's eyeing getting the USMCA approved and pushed through. And, well, that's interesting, right? We're in an election year for him. So he wants to see results, and he's ready to make a deal. And, well, the deal's been made, so he's ready to make a deal with Congress to get it pushed through and in motion, right? So it's interesting. It's interesting. I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing for Canada. Better than not having a deal, certainly, but it's not as good as NAFTA was. So here is the New York Times, and this is on to Iran, and it does tie very closely to Canada, but we're gonna look at some CBC News coverage of this, and they cover it under World instead of Canadian news, which I think is really interesting. This one, World, but we'll get there. First, new video shows 2 Iranian missiles hit the Ukrainian plane. Now, this was reported 2 days ago, and I've heard that this is misinformation, but everything about this has been misinformation from the beginning. Everything I've said has been wrong. So I'm going to continue to be wrong and report to you what other people are saying. Anyway, the New York Times is reporting, and they do the video, so you can watch the video here, which shows 2 missiles, and they do this whole article on this. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. Here we go. The New York Times has verified security camera footage on Tuesday that shows for the first time that 2 missiles hit Ukrainian International Airlines Flight 752 on January 8th. The missiles were launched from an Iranian military site around 8 miles from the plane. The new video fills a gap about why the plane's transponder stopped working, seconds before it was hit by a second missile. An earlier Times analysis confirmed what Iran later admitted, that an Iranian missile did strike the plane. The Times also established that the transponder stopped working before that missile hit the plane. The new video appears to confirm that an initial strike disabled the transponder before the second strike, also seen in the video around 23 seconds later. Neither strike down the plane immediately. The new video shows the airliner on fire, circling back toward Tehran's international airport. Minutes later, it exploded and crashed down, narrowly missing the village of Khaja Abad. An earlier Times video reconstruction below shows. Okay, and I'm not going to look at the reconstruction. I've said before, what a horrific way to go. And my goodness, it's even worse than I thought, right? Can you imagine being hit by one missile and then the plane being okay enough to circle back and then being hit by another missile and then blowing up? Unbelievable. So the CBC did a 1 minute long video on this 2 missile strike thing, and this was yesterday at 1:41 in the afternoon, and nothing else. There's nothing else on this. Like, I looked, 2 missiles for Iran. You would think that this is a big deal, because if there were 2 missiles, is that accidental? Whoops, fire a second one. Right? I mean, I don't know. And why wouldn't you close the commercial air corridor? Why wouldn't you shut that down if there was the potential for your radar to read that as an incoming missile or as an incoming contact or whatever you want to call it, right? Like, it just, the more that is uncovered, and here's another Iranian news, the more it seems that, well, they knew what they were doing, right? Here's CBC, and this is World again. Low-level Iranian officials likely scapegoats for downing of Ukrainian plane, experts say. Iran's judiciary announced arrests had been made for the downing of UIA flight PS 752. Now, I want you to pay attention to the way they position the Iranians in this article, and then in the next article, we're going to look at the way the Iranians are positioned there. And I think that it's very stark and really interesting. So I'll spell it out for you, but here we go. Iran's secretive and unaccountable judicial system may scapegoat some low-level officials, finding them guilty of playing a role in last week's downing of a Ukrainian passenger plane, experts say. But anyone higher in the hierarchy who bears responsibility is likely to face justice. Quote, I think it's plausible that lower-level people will be identified as guilty for the actual decision to launch the air defense missile that shot down the airliner, said Thomas Juneau, an associate professor of public and international affairs at the University of Ottawa. Will more senior people be identified? I doubt it, says Juneau, who is a former Middle East analyst with the Department of National Defense. However, some mid-level officials could be held accountable in some form, he said. Normal circumstances, I would have said probably not, but given how unusual everything is right now, and given that domestic pressure that the Iranian government is under right now, in addition to the international pressure, perhaps you could see that, Juneau said. On Tuesday, Iran's judiciary announced that arrests had been made for the downing of UIA flight PS752, which killed all 176 people, including 57 Canadians, aboard just after takeoff from Tehran. Iran had initially dismissed allegations that a missile brought down the plane, but days later, its Revolutionary Guard admitted it had shot down the plane by mistake as it braced for a possible military confrontation with the United States. Many Iranians were killed in the crash, which has sparked protests against the government in recent days. On Tuesday, Iran's judiciary spokesperson, I'm not going to try it, Esmaili, said, quote, extensive investigations had taken place and some individuals are arrested, but his statement on the judiciary's website did not say how many individuals had been detained or name them. Meanwhile, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani on Tuesday also called for a special court to be set up to probe the downing of the plane and promised his administration would pursue the case, quote, by all means. Juneau said the Iranian government will claim that those responsible have been brought to justice, but that it's very clear there, quote, will be no justice and accountability. And there's more to this article. I'm going to read a little bit of it. The priority will be protecting itself, managing the fallout, and then the damage, he said. As for punishment, lower-level officials could face long prison sentences and even death, Juneau said, but those higher up, if found guilty, possibly would have lighter sentences to try to maximize the public's impact of identifying them as guilty, but without penalizing one of their own too much. So in this article, they're talking about arrests having been made, investigations been done, lots of things happening in Iran. In this article, they're talking about how long investigations will take and how long it would take for them to get compensation. Here's the Globe and Mail saying, Canadian government may offer interim compensation to families of Flight 752 victims. All of them or just the Canadian ones? All 176 or just the 57 Canadians? I don't know. It's not clear. Back to the article. The federal government said it's considering offering some short-term financial support to the families of the Flight 752 victims, as Canada and 4 other countries affected by the disaster are set to meet in London Thursday to form a plan to deal with Iran. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Vadim Prystaiko said he hopes that 5 countries will agree to form a joint investigative team that will operate in parallel with the Iranian-led investigation on the ground in Tehran. The foreign ministers from Canada, Ukraine, Britain, Sweden, and Afghanistan will also discuss possible legal options as well as the feasibility of passing a resolution condemning Iran at the United Nations Security Council. Ottawa says the possible assistance it could provide in the interim would help families cope with expenses stemming from the tragedy. The government ultimately expects Iran to pay compensation to the families, but realizes that a full investigation could take time to determine precisely what happened. Well, hold on here. I'm just going to back up quickly. What happened is that 2 missiles were shot by Iran, and it took down the plane. That's what happened. Like, it's going to take months, so we've got to pay these people. What? Back to this. What about insurance? Would they not all mostly have insurance, like for the most part, right? Like by and large, if you don't have insurance, please come and see the government. Otherwise, access your insurance. And when Iran is made to pay, then you'll get your money. I don't know. Canada's saying, yeah, we'll pay you. No problem. Thanks, Justin. Back to this. Omar Al-Gajabar, excuse me if I've got that wrong, Parliamentary Secretary to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said interim compensation is one measure being mulled and, quote, a decision will be made in short order. Interim compensation would leave Ottawa responsible for ensuring Iran fully repaid what monies were already distributed by Canada. I don't like it. I think it's terrible. And I think that it's interesting that on one side, in this one, they're saying that the Iranian government is basically a dictatorship, which it is. The government controls the judiciary and the courts and all that other stuff. Excuse me. So if they want to say you're guilty and blame somebody for this, they can do that and bring that person to the international international ring and say this person was the person responsible and we've prosecuted them and you're welcome, right? It was a mistake. We've all agreed and it's Trump's fault, right? That's basically what they're trying to push here, which is just wild. And here is, and instead of being held accountable by the countries with citizens on that plane, right? Instead of being held accountable by the government of Iran, Canada, which just had citizens on the plane, it wasn't a Canadian plane. It wasn't shot down by Canada. Canada has very little to do with this, really. We're jumping in to say, yeah, we'll pay for Iran and we'll make sure they pay later. Isn't that weird? Doesn't that seem strange? Oh, let's go back to December 18th, 2019. Liberal MP denies false and unfounded accusations. He is an agent for Iran. What? We've got people accusing MPs of being an agent of a foreign government? Isn't that weird? Here's the article. A Liberal MP is denying being a foreign agent after a video posted online accused him of working with the Iranian regime. Mijad Johari, MP for Richmond Hill, Ontario, said the allegations are completely false. Quote, in a recent program aired on 2 Persian language broadcasts, without a shred of evidence, I was accused of having connections to officials of the Islamic Republic of Iran. These accusations are absolutely false and unfounded, he said in an email. The video shows an interview with an associate of Mossad Molavi, recorded in Turkey. Molavi was an outspoken opponent of the Iranian regime and, according to Turkish media, was a former Iranian spy who had defected. He was killed in a drive-by shooting in Istanbul in November. His associate said during the interview that the Iranians have placed agents in foreign governments and specifically mentioned Johari. Those who spread these slanderous and baseless accusations want to instigate hate and fear without providing a single fact to support it, said Johari in a sentence. We should stand together against this hateful behavior. Senator Linda Frum said the accusations warrant closer scrutiny, and she would like to hear from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on what he makes of Johari's actions. I think that it's interesting. I'm going to stop reading the article. There's a bit more to it, and the link is in the description if you want to read it. But I want to point out, if you have a real argument with somebody, you can chop that wood. You can get to the heart of something. But if you talk to somebody and they come back with, those are hateful accusations, and anybody who spreads those slanderous and baseless accusations are trying to instigate hate and fear while not providing facts, those people, they don't have anything else, right? There's nothing to back up what they're saying other than stop speaking words that make me sound bad. I don't like that. Seems weird. Seems like we should investigate that a lot more. Seems like we should have an official response from the Prime Minister's office. Right? I think so. I think so. And yesterday, just to finish off the video, yesterday I reported on an old version of the CBC headline that was talking about Stephen Harper asking for regime change. And I said regime change is very specific, and he doesn't actually say that. Now, he never actually said that, and the newspaper had to do a change of the headline. They didn't do an apology, but they made the correction. So that's interesting. Here's the National Post reporting. Chris Selly, Harper misquotes shows why regime change needed in some Canadian newsrooms. CBC and CTV's newsrooms published rather important clarifications to online news stories on Tuesday afternoon, the main point of which was that Stephen Harper never uttered the phrase regime change at an international policy gabfest in New Delhi. The topic was Iran and its shooting down of a Ukrainian airliner with 176 souls aboard, the vast majority of whom were heading to Canada and 157 of whom were Canadian citizens. The public broadcaster's original headline, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper says peace in the Middle East will only come if there is regime change in Iran, became former Prime Minister Stephen Harper says peace in the Middle East will only come after changes come to Iran. Meanwhile, CTV's headline, Harper calls for Iranian regime change in wake of down jet, became Harper speaks out on Iran in wake of down jet. These are indeed clarifying. Many in the journalism industry would suggest the problem called for the more serious correction. However, as everyone involved in this story, the headlines and the associated tweets will have known, regime change has a very specific and pretentious meaning. The Cambridge Dictionary defines it as a complete change of government, especially one brought about by force. Collins, if you prefer, says it's, quote, the transition from one political regime to another, especially through concerted political or military action. And Harper never uttered those words. He was talking about change, but he didn't talk about regime change. Specifically, I think when you think regime change, you think of Iraq, right? Like those words were uttered a lot in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. So make of that what you will, but the papers changed it, so it's interesting. And all of this is just, I mean, having leaders who don't have a clear idea of where they're going with something, and Justin Trudeau isn't negotiating well with China. As I said at the top, the Chinese have signed phase 1 of the trade deal with Donald Trump, and you would think Justin Trudeau takes to Twitter pretty quickly when he's got a success. You would think if Meng Wanzhou, if there'd been movement there, he'd be all over Twitter talking about the success and time to hit reset with China. There hasn't been anything like that, not that I've seen. And maybe it's happened before I did my show, and who knows. But it seems like that's not a great sign for things to come. So stay tuned. All of these stories are up in the air, and I'm sure that there are things to happen with them soon. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.ca. No, .co. CanadaReport.co. And have a wonderful, wonderful day.